And we are live. We are live finally. A few of hiccups, technically speaking, but we are here today with Jim Newman. Fantastic. Jim, welcome to the show. Welcome to this webinar.
Thanks, Frank. It's good to see you. And yeah, technical hitches aside, let's hope it's not due to vulnerability in the platform, right?
No, absolutely. We hate vulnerability, don't we? Brilliant. But thank you for coming on the show. I want to give maybe the audience and few people that don't know you yet. So Jim and I go a little bit long way. Jim has been in different organization, from small to large to startup to different environments, and I love his perspective on as an executive. He has a deep technical knowledge, but also that high level view that appealed to me particularly, and hence why we decided to organize this. But before I ramble along on you and your life, tell us a bit more about you.
I quite like the fact that you very diplomatically kind of rushed through this. He's worked in a number of businesses, but actually, what you mean to say is that my risk tolerance doesn't extend to working in startups that sometimes run out of funding and make you all redundant, because that's a pattern in some of those startup and scale up companies. So my risk tolerance for what we do with security is one thing, and my risk tolerance for the kind of jobs I take is different. Yeah, my background is really eclectic, not just beyond that. I'm a French teacher by profession, but I worked in road safety for a number of years and gave me a very different sense of risk. But yeah, I just see us as going out there and finding the problems and trying to find out solutions for them, whichever way we look at it.
Fantastic. And today we wanted to talk a little bit on two perspectives. We're going to do a little bit of role play. I'm going to act as a security person, and you're going to act as a CISO that is enlightened.
Okay,
As
enlightened CISO, right?
Yes.
Get a little halo and sit cross-legged and very Buddha.
Exactly. You have the halo light, the ring light.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Definitely run to that. Go for it. So, security person.
So as a security person,
I
come to you and say, look, we have millions of vulnerability. You know, the development are not listening to us. What we're going to do about this? Like, how we convince the CTO and the rest of the organization to actually fix everything? Because, you know, we have SLA for critical vulnerability that are 3 days that are late than, 40 days. What are we going to do about this?
So, well, there's the thing, security person. The CTO, the developers, the engineers, it doesn't matter who we're talking to, they've all got competing priorities. We've got a million vulnerabilities, and all they ever hear from security is fear, uncertainty, doubt. Oh, you've got a million vulnerabilities. And a lot of the time, those vulnerabilities, we've held a whole load of them for a very, very long period of time. They're not actually getting exploited. Yes, we want to patch everything, but right now you're going to that team and saying, here is a stack load of work, when they've never actually seen the impact. We need to prioritize it. So we need to be able to give them demonstrable, enriched intelligence about what actually needs fixing. We need to look at the context, and we need to look at whether it's exploitable, because just because something has a CVE number and a CVSS score, it doesn't mean that where it is and how it's deployed is a huge threat. But if we've got a million, whatever we do has got to scale.
Right, but CVE said that is very bad. That particular set of vulnerability are very bad, and hence we should fix them now. Should we listen to CVE, or should we disable our own?
No, we need to enrich that data, right? Because even that really critical CVE, well, what system is it running on? Is it a system where the assets are critical, where where anything that asset can touch or within that network is critical. So we need to look at the asset, we need to look at the environment, we need to look at what our risk tolerance is for that particular asset environment, and we need to look at what else there is within the environment that could be problematic. We can't just take in isolation a particular CVE, because what if the system isn't even connected to the internet? Actually, scrub that. That's a dangerous idea, because that's how you end up with IoT problems within CNI, right? Is that a system that never should have been connected to the internet does at some stage get connected? But it's trying to look at it and say, well, hang on a second, this particular system, the context of it, that particular vulnerability, however critical, it can't be exploited because you need these other conditions for it to run. So the likelihood or the ability for it ever to be impacted is that relevant in the way that we've got that particular asset deployed.
Wow. Does that mean that I need to sit down with the development and with the various teams and actually analyze what they have? I can't just push SLA to them?
Well, so short answer is yes. But going back to my point, that problem doesn't scale. If we've got 1 million vulnerabilities, which are the ones that you're going to pick for that conversation? So we still have to identify the ones when we have that conversation that we're going to talk to them about. So we need a means and an ability as a security team to try and actually assess and address the ones that we're going to actually talk to them about. What is our hit list, and how do we show them that it's been effectively prioritized? Because it doesn't help when you're having conversations with engineers and you say, here's a critical vulnerability, that the engineer is the person saying back to you in security, you know nothing about our systems. There's no way that, and it doesn't help if they're the ones pointing out to you the myriad ways in which actually you're just producing noise and not adding value. So we do need the ability to actually do some of that initial prioritization and adding to the data before we take it to them. I mean, they need to be in the conversation about, okay, which of your assets are critical, what's connected to where, what's the risk within the environment, who's the risk owner that's responsible if something goes down.
Well, that sounds like a lot of work.
Back to the point, right? How do we scale it? Because vulnerability management it's a huge amount of work. Like, it is, I think probably the infinity symbol was initially designed with vulnerability management programs in mind, because it's constant, right? And it's whack-a-mole. You can just be like, okay, I've run the patches. Oh, I can't patch this one. Well, they'll just have to wait till there's a patch available. But what you're looking to do is focus on the ones that really, really matter. And we need technology and we need some automation to help us achieve that. I'm not saying buy a blinky box, because, you know, everybody's got a magic blinky box. And Frank, you work for a company that makes virtual kind of equivalents of a blinky box. It's a technology. But what the technology does is streamlines and adds value to the data that you already have. Removes a lot of effort for a security team.
And stepping a little bit out of the role play, I totally agree with that. The message that we want to get across is no blinky box or no magic box will help you ever solve a process problem, but you can accelerate a process with technology and the right tool and the right data and information available at hand. Because, as you rightfully mentioned, Jim, having these data at scale and having a risk-based conversation with a development team might get you supported instead of pushback. And I don't know in your career, but in my career, I've seen a lot of pushback because there was not that emotional empathy with the development team on sitting down actually and discussing around why this particular problem couldn't be exploited and why this particular problem was actually more dangerous. And sometimes the team in itself have more information than you as a security person, because it's their realm, it's their domain. You bring their expertise in there.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And and it is very much, it's moving away from being the department of no, the department of we're policing you and here's the set of boundaries, to a two-way conversation to better understand, not just actually yes, we know what these security standards are. We can help them to understand what some of the security risks are with it, but they can help us better understand. So many times those conversations with developers and with engineers have resulted in me coming away learning more about what they're doing, but also them saying, look, you're worried about this thing over here. What about this? Okay, well, our tools haven't picked that up on. Like, we didn't know about that, and that is definitely a much more important thing for us to focus on. And you'll frequently find that the engineers and the developers, the people who say to you, like, why are you worrying about X? Because here is a much bigger problem. Yeah, we do need to worry about that, and we still need to worry about this thing. But you're right, we'll come up with a plan. So it's a two-way conversation. But the other side of that is the empathy with the fact that yes, we need to be secure by design and secure by default. But so often in our companies, you'll find that it is okay. What's minimum viable security? What is the thing we can get away with? Because you've got a development team that are hugely focused on, we need to get new features, we need to get the features out. When are you shipping the next release? What's coming next? They're very much focused and incentivized and pushed for the development. You know, it's great when you'll have teams that will, when you've got a full AppSec team who will really end-to-end get security in place. And it's great when you've got teams that will say, oh, well, we periodically have a security sprint where we don't just look at fixing bugs, but we specifically go and look for the vulnerabilities and we work with the security team. But a lot of the time it is, look, we'll just have to do this as part of while we go. So kind of working with what we've got and understanding that they're not pushed to do this. You can't just turn up with a spreadsheet, because so often it's a spreadsheet, right? Here's a spreadsheet of the vulnerabilities. Go down the list and do them one by one. Or maybe, if you're lucky, the security team will put in a Jira ticket for some of them. But so often I've seen spreadsheets being used to track all of the vulnerabilities in your environment.
Yeah, the infinite vulnerability spreadsheet back on the vulnerability cycle.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we could we could build a mobile app from that.
But it's not a
track and trace vulnerabilities and their adjacency, right?
But it's usually spreadsheet, and a spreadsheet attached to an email is not a conversation starter. And
no, exactly. Where's my live data? Like, I thought I patched this. Didn't we patch this? Has your vulnerability scanner actually scanned it since we made the changes? You know, you want to remove those inward conversations. You need something that is as close to real time as you can have it, so that if somebody does fix or address or accept the risk, that you're able to see it in that view, rather than exporting the results of a Qualys scan and then throwing it over the fence and saying it's your problem, and then them coming back and saying, hey, we agreed that we were going to accept a load of these. Oh yeah, well we couldn't address that. So thanks for reading it. It just remove those barriers.
And I think in that conversation, it's a transactional conversation, while, as we mentioned before, vulnerability management is infinite. It's like a muscle. It's like maintaining a well-oiled machine that you keep on oiling, and it's gonna make your technology go forward and long. It seems like I'm selling an MOT test.
Well, no, but you're right. Whether it's oil, it's that about it's painting the bridge, right? It's that the moment that you've finished, you're starting again. But in our case, you know, the whole thing, you're just going round and round and round again. And until you can automate everything, and until 0 days are not a thing, there is this constant need for people to be managing vulnerabilities throughout the environment. And then is it infrastructure engineers? Is it DevOps engineers? Is it old school kind of network engineers? Who is it that needs to be doing it? You know, who quarterbacks the which bit goes where, and who's responsible for those assets? Because it can take a lot of time to kind of oversee and manage that whole program.
Right. And a lot of organizations can adopt the SRE or full stack culture, where you build and you run and you own it. but sometimes you have platform team that look at operationally where you run things, and then you have app team. So it's also understanding what works best in a specific organization. And that's, I guess, in my experience over the years, this has been the most challenging part of understanding what is the most effective vulnerability management strategy across application security, infrastructure, and cloud for that specific organization, because it's what makes it click for them.
But whichever way your teams are structured, it doesn't matter whether they are an AppSec team and an infra team and a networks team and however, or if it's purely hey, we've got squads, they're all a DevSecOps squad. It doesn't matter. It, own it, break it, fix it. I was going down a whole Spice Girls thing there, but it doesn't matter which way you look at it. Every one of those teams is looking at vulnerabilities, and the vulnerabilities come through, or at least the way we see, identify, detect, and then respond to them, they come from different feeds, because a network like a classic Nessus or Qualys, other scanners are available, whatever you want, whatever way you want to look at it. Those kind of scanners that are specifically looking for particular like fingerprint the system, identify what it's running, what are the versions, what are the patches, what are the CVEs that are running on that particular system. Great, that gives us something that that you can change through either your infrastructure engineers saying, okay, well, we're going to patch this, or it might be Windows or Mac on your endpoints. You've got teams who are taking that, but it's one specific type of feed. But then, your application security teams, when they're coding and they're using static code analysis, the vulnerabilities being reported to them are about the code that they're deploying. So it's just another feed of, well, here are vulnerabilities identified through a different mechanism. And then a penetration test. What does a penetration test give you? Well, it gives you pen test findings, but that's just vulnerabilities. They're just, they should be feeding into whatever your vulnerability management program is. Like, they get treated as though they're on an extra pedestal because you spent a lot of money on your pen test, and therefore here are some things that they found, not always exploitable, but they found vulnerabilities, because that's what they do. And if they are exploitable, well, that's great. You get criticals and things like that, and they get treated more quickly. But it is ultimately, a pen test is just, here's a list of vulnerabilities. Bug bounty programs, same thing. Somebody's found one that can, or maybe not, be exploited, and it should be added into here's the list of things we want to fix. And it's another feed in that's doing it. Or an engineer saying to you, by the way, did you know our database was open on this particular port and your vulnerability scanner hasn't picked it up and this other thing hasn't picked it up? Well, okay, it's a vulnerability. Whichever way we feed them in, we need them to go into some big melting pot where the asset owner is known and identified, and the criticality of the asset is clearly determined, and our risk exposure, and then the right people can pick it up without needing to send an email with a spreadsheet saying, is this your one or not?
Or 5 spreadsheets.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right? Either you're going to send a spreadsheet to all of those teams and every one of them's got a tab in the spreadsheet, or they've just got to filter it themselves, or you're making 5 different spreadsheets and they're all getting it and they're wading through a load of data that's not relevant to them. Like, maybe we're just making work for the sake of, like, everybody says we've got this huge shortage of talent and there's all these jobs going. Maybe all the jobs are in vulnerability management because the jobs are for people to write spreadsheets and add extra tabs. Maybe that's what it is.
I would like to see that announced in a job spec. Please come and fill up our.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. How many jobs really, instead of saying you need all of the following skills, should they really just say, how good's your Excel? And in a year's time, how good's your ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, actually, on that subject, I wanted to say, the owner, the asset, all this information is actually just to track fundamentally who owns what, where, and manage this. Ideally, if you have a DevOps cycle and a DevSecOps cycle, in the traditional sprint planning, those are all only issue. And if you feed as a security team in that kind of muscle, in that cycle, then you might be lucky enough to get things resolved. If you just send a spreadsheet, that will get eventually scheduled where somebody will generate the Jira ticket and will add it in the backlog, because that's how team works.
Yeah.
Unless they love Excel. But I struggle to find the DevOps teams that love spreadsheets.
No. Yeah, completely.
And
Hugely manual.
maybe on ChatGPT side and the GPT and the LLM, there's been, I think when it was announced by the OpenAI, everybody in security went completely nuts for two reasons. I think they went nuts for security and privacy reason, because everybody started throwing data at a generic website without privacy information. But aside from the obvious, they start wondering, can we use this to actually solve all our code problems and all our vulnerability problems? And I played around myself a lot, because as a security people, we seems to be oddly attracted by new technology
Yep.
instead of being reluctant on adopting them and testing
We're
them securely.
curious by nature. That's why security is such a wonderful place to be, because we're curious and we get a kick from learning new things, or finding things out, or working out where the problems are with them, and being
Right.
cynical about them. Those are things that kind of make us, well, maybe it's just me. And yeah, it can't be. The number of people I meet in our industry who love moving with, okay, what is that new thing? Well, what's good about it? What's bad about it? No, that's rubbish. This has been done before. Okay, there's healthy doses of cynicism, but there's also a passion for, there's got to be a better way of doing X, Y, or Z. Like, certainly for technical people, the technical minded, we're always looking at, okay, how can I automate this? How can I script this? How can I make my life easier? What can I? And okay, a lot of the time we spend more time going down the rabbit hole of trying to make our life easier for something we do once every 6 months. But it's you're trying to solve a problem, and how can I get technology to solve these problems? And so new things, I say new things, just those iterations of I know you've benefited a lot from the work you've been doing with
Mm-hmm.
LLMs, and not just ChatGPT, but some of the work that you've been doing has really helped you. And I've been tinkering, all of it sided desk, none of it with work data, and it's fascinating to see, like, okay, look at all the possibilities. And I mean, you look like Microsoft's kind of security co-pilot, that has the potential to really revolutionize what incident response teams look at. It takes out, like, we've had a lot of work in kind of machine learning systems for kind of security detection and detection, alerting, less response. But then Microsoft Security Copilot, what it feeds into it and what it can then do with it in the context, and those kind of multi-step approaches look fascinating.
Now, I think there are very specific use cases where LLM can help, and where LLM can help securing, for example, your code in the nth degree by removing the code itself.
Yeah.
And making it not run. But I think Copilot as well has been extremely helpful on actually accelerating code, or accelerating specific section of things, or specific odd problem that can be accelerated. And we are just at the inception of all this. Like, I am excited as much as you are on trying new things and new technology and experiment more, because as security folks, we are always on the short aspect of it, of the staffing. And we are always, I think the latest statistics was one security person every 570 devs. Sometimes it's 120 from GitHub. We are always going to be one in a room of hundreds and multiple hundred of developers. So we try to scale with automation, because that's the only way to go about. And hence full circle on the vulnerability management aspect and the application security aspect of trying to reduce to the minimum the amount of information. But also we need to buy in. Like as a CISO, if you go to your board and you discuss with the rest of the organization or the rest of the team, I have millions of problems. So what? I was I was living with them yesterday.
But it's not just the CISO that's doing that. And that's like, it goes back to that empathy angle. You show me anybody in the C-suite who is not saying, like everybody, I need more budget, I need more headcount. Like everybody has the same things that they're asking for. And just if you distill it into those two things, every single member of the C-suite, every single person in the organization, and yes, we can look at studies of whether we are or aren't under resourced, but you can't just go and say, oh, we need more, we've got these particular problems. You have to choose the hill to die on. You've got to
Yes.
prioritize, as we do with vulnerabilities. You've got to prioritize the things you focus on. And particularly because I've worked in those crazy startups where their risk appetite is huge, and they don't know what they don't know about security. And so you're trying to take them on a, I hate the term, but there's no other, you're taking them on a journey of no security or very minimal security to better security. And you're frequently met with the, yeah, but we haven't had any problems before. No, you don't know you haven't had any problems because you've got no detection. Like nobody's looking, there's no detection, there's no alerting. You got these things over here. You wouldn't know if you'd been compromised. And I have worked in an organization where when we started to deploy controls, that we found a number of compromises. We had production servers running crypto miners. We had file servers that had ransomware, and nobody'd really realized. They realized they couldn't access these files on the file servers, but nobody had. It just thought there was a problem with the system, and so when you go in and say we're going to find that systems have been compromised, well, we haven't had any problems before. No, you just don't know. And then
they weren't big enough that you were on the news, but you could be on the news.
Well, no, but they couldn't have been on the news because if nobody's taken the data and attributed it to your company and put it out there, if you don't know you've had a breach, it's if a tree falls in the forest. If my data is encrypted and unavailable, but no one's there to know that's the case, have I really had a data breach?
Well, maybe that data wasn't useful at all. So one of the risk methodology, instead of securing it, is like get rid of that data overall.
Switch off the internet. All my systems are completely isolated. Nobody's allowed in with a camera. Like there's no electricity. They're all switched off. No batteries. My data's safe, right?
That might be the extreme case, but on the file server, on that story, if you don't need that data, maybe instead of retrieving it, you could get rid of it. The challenge is in a ransomware incident, you might still be ransom with that data to be threatened, because right now I guess I don't remember the latest statistic on ransomware, but they're getting basically automated. It's becoming business-wise one of the more lucrative one that leverage vulnerability level, social engineering, leverage a lot of these elements to systematically attack organization, and hence the least attack surface you have externally or internally or people-wise.
And but it's like you say, right? From an automation point of view, it is just that multi-step, and it's MITRE ATT&CK framework and cyber kill chain. It's it becomes easier to automate these things. You scan, you identify a vulnerability, you already have some exploits. Those exploits you may need, phishing, you may need to compromise a different system, whatever it might be. But the path is already kind of set before you, and automating and doing that at scale. If you're an attacker and you hit a large number of systems, you're going to find some with relatively easy automated steps. The ones that you really want to target are going to be a bit complex. That's why we end with initial access brokers, and then your ransomware as a service. You've got people who specialize in each of the elements, but it's a multi-step. From a defense point of view, we've got to close off those initial accesses. That's why we need to patch the vulnerabilities. I know I've gone full circle, but it's why it's so important, because initial access has to happen somewhere, right? And either it's going to be a user account and credentials, social engineering, phishing, whatever, or it's going to be, okay, we actually have gained, we've gained access, we've gained a foothold on a system through a vulnerability. Oh, and we found another vulnerability, and that's how we did privilege escalation. And, or bang, we got remote code execution on this particular system, and it runs in a privileged context. So, yeah, we need to patch our stuff.
Or maybe,
I was polite.
we'll
Aware that I wanted to say something else there, but
or maybe we'll let
but it's true.
ransomware gangs to run our vulnerability management, because they seems to be better at identifying internal and external vulnerabilities.
But it is, we kind of go back to we need it to scale, because everybody always says, oh, you've got to do the basics. Actually, when we talk about patching, it is one of the basics. How hard is it? Keep everything updated. Actually, it's really hard. So it is one of the basics. It doesn't make it easy, because again, if you've got tens, hundreds, millions of vulnerabilities or systems running things, because, oh, well, hang on a second, we can't patch this one because we've run testing, it's a legacy system, the value, the cost to deploy it, that when you start measuring up the economic impact of a particular breach on that versus the cost of fixing it, you do end up with okay, this is going to end up being a risk acceptance, or we're going to have to shutter it. And often it's not we'll pay for some other mitigating controls. It's either patch it or just leave it and hope it doesn't get hit. What can we stand in front of it? No, that'll cost money. Don't spend any time on it.
Well, it's a trade-off. Like, is a trade-off in terms of risk of what do we do with this? Do we spend money on it? Because sometimes you have legacy systems that don't even can be upgraded because they run software that is legacy and nobody maintains. So you have still the Windows 2003 that run or Server 2013 that runs the old legacy stuff, and you can't touch it because we have applications that are critical for our structure of an organization to actually not be able to touch, and nobody knows who touched that software. I mean, software, as I think Tanya Janka mentioned, software is like cheese in the sun. It doesn't age well.
No, she's got it right. That's
it's true. And sometimes the challenge is people leave organization after a few years or change team, and that piece of software doesn't have an owner, doesn't get maintained. So sometimes those are the challenge of vulnerability management, that is not black and white, just patch, just fix it. There are so many nuances of, I don't know. For me, for example, I got one of the most enlightening thing was one of my CTO saying, I'm not going to upgrade on my Windows machine. I'm just going to move to a different version of Windows. So we're going to risk accept the whole lot of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it took me 2 or 3 seconds to realize that's actually smart. And I felt so dumb.
When you start talking about those people move on from organizations, I know somebody who worked at a company that I worked at in 2003, 2004, and about 2018, he messaged me and said, I've just found one of your code comments. See how good I was? I actually commented my code. But the code comment read something along the lines of, this is a hacky workaround. I'll come back and fix it later. I wrote that in 2003. He found it in 2018. And he said, I had a look at it, had a look at what it was doing, didn't really understand it, thought it's not broken, I'm just going to leave it. And when you're like, that is terrifying. Like that's 15-year-old code that I knew at the time when I was not very good, and I was still like, I'm not a great developer now, but it's but it was a hacky workaround that I'm pretty sure I know what it was roughly doing. And you think back on it and you're like, oh no, I would have come up with a much more elegant solution now. I could definitely have changed it, but they've left it there for 15 years. Nobody's changed it. He's gone and looked at it and gone, yeah, I don't really understand what it does, and I'll just leave it, because if it ain't broke. It's things like that get baked into legacy, and somebody's done it when they were early in their career, and actually, so it may actually be a really shoddy piece of code that had no one's senior reviewing it, and nobody's really looked at it because, well, it's fine. it's still running.
It's working.
And you think about that in the context of kind of a lot of our cloud services. If you're doing that in cloud services, it's costing you money, right? If you write something that's really non-performant, or leaves a load of connections to a database open, like there's so many ways in which poorly written code can come back and haunt you from a cost point of view. It's got nothing to do with vulnerabilities and security, but you kind of think legacy code is Tanya's line about cheese not aging well. She's got it right.
And I think one other line that I really like, I think Kevin Fielder brought it up recently, is cost reward, or time spent on something versus time spent on something else. It's like, and it applies so well in vulnerability management, because you can spend time on fixing something, but if it works, you probably spend time on fixing something more urgent, because in an organization everything is burning all the time, and you need to select between the least smelly cheese or the more smelly cheese.
And Kevin's point plays into that's how so many of our development and engineering teams are looking at it, which is, why would I go and fix this thing that doesn't really look that broken, when we have all these other things that we have to do? Where's the value of my time spent? We look at it. It's the same with incident response. Is you can go down the rabbit hole and you can actually find more information. And okay, what is the point where you have enough evidence, enough information to be dealing and moving on to it? Where is the value in your time being spent? What's the thing to focus on that gives you the greatest value? And again, identify those priorities, have really clear actionable intelligence that backs up why it's a priority. And I'm not dissing the idea of CVSS scores, that they have a real purpose, and there's a need to be able to say this is why this has a particular score. But then what that misses, what it's what it's lacking, is what's the context, what's the value of the asset to me. Like say, if this is a legacy system that's protected from other things, doesn't have any critical data on it, and isn't connected to another system it can compromise, do you throw it to the wolves?
Well, CVSS is point in time, right? Is a snapshot of a problem in a particular case, and sometimes it's not touched at all. And risk, on the other hand, is a much more probabilistic approach that says this particular problem in this particular context, in this particular point in time, for me as an organization, has this particular level of risk. And sometimes, I guess, in vulnerability management, we used to mix up the two terms of severity, split up by CVSS, and risk. And to be honest, CVSS, 10 years ago, CVSS 3.1, created the concept of temporal and environmental, but unfortunately those are complex and need to be really driven by the organization with tools and technology and way to modify, and it never got applied, it never got implemented. So we ended up reluctantly talking about risk when risk was not risk, was just severity.
But that's the thing. What we look for is what's the most simple way that we can get to a point, and the more complex we make the assessment or the framework that we want to use, that's when we start to hit problems. There's some really excellent kind of actuarial science behind being able to calculate and assess risks, but do we have the time? Unless you've got a lot of resource within your team, do you have the time to be able to go out and say, actually, here is all of the data that has confirmed the cost value of the risk and the mitigations, and to be able to say that this is why we can actually say this particular risk has this particular exposure and would cost us this much, that you can do it, but the effort that goes into producing each and every item on your risk register becomes huge. It's not something that's trivial to automate.
No, it's not. And that's the challenge of, like, do you use your internal team to actually talk with developer, contextualize, find a solution to the problem, help them getting up to speed, or you spend n amount of time to actually contextualize risk, and to which extent actually contextualize risk, because Certain organization might need a higher level of complexity and higher level of risk contextualization with a lot more detail. Some others might need a bit more faster decision making of a prioritized list based on business criticality, internal or external asset, and things like that are clear cut. So how much effort you spend on that versus how much effort you spend on not fixing vulnerability or not dealing. I was always biased on talking with developer because you develop that emotional empathy and context awareness that will make you so much more efficient than trying to calculate the perfect risk score. And sometimes we get wrapped up in trying to calculate the perfect risk number. I don't have any number. That's the usual argument I was receiving. Like, I don't have any number. But if you calculate a number with some basic mathematics, that number is worse than I don't have any number.
Well, but it feels like it's a critical risk. Because how often is it, okay, we've got 4, we've got 5, what's your status? Oh, we've got critical, we've got that. There is a huge amount of, this is very opinion led, and it's you've got somebody who is not using solid data to underpin it, but you've got a quick, easy fix, and that's what happens a lot of the time with your risk register and your risk ratings, and it makes it difficult, and it's quite transparent to the teams that you work with that that's how a lot of those calculations are arrived at, and why a good conversation is working with them to see, okay, we've said that this particular risk is X, let's work together to be sure that that's the case. Or we know what your assets are, we know what your environment looks like, we know what the impact is if there is a problem with your environment, if it's a data loss problem from your environment. So we know what the impact is for this asset or for this environment. So you've got the impact associated with the asset itself. So now when it comes to a particular vulnerability, what you're then identifying and trying to pin is, okay, what's the likelihood? Now we know that there is a specific likelihood, or at least here is this risk, here is this vector of attack against this particular asset. What is the likelihood of that happening? And that's what you then get to work on to then be able to say we can now deal with it properly. Because the impact, that should be determined by the asset or the environment, or and the environment, because okay, the impact of us breaching this one server, well, that's this, but actually, it also talks to all of these systems.
Yeah, how much they're worth for you. But I really like how you put it, because it's data against data. Like, a lot of these things are computable at scale, are computable at data. There are more on the risk register side. There are more abstract element, like what it comes out of a threat modeling that is less likely to be underpinned by a lot of scientific data on the probability of exploitation. And sometimes it's not even worth to actually spend that time. Like, having a vulnerability in a system that is in a DMZ or externally facing, that is highly likely to be exposed, that has an exploit available in the wild, that is fixable, like, that is all data that you can compute to actually come up with a risk and a quick decision method on that. But having an identity problem on a weak identity using a SAML token or a single password, those things have maybe not likelihood statistical element, and even if you use statistical element, I wouldn't think they will be applicable or useful to make a decision. Like, is it good, is it bad, and to which degree we can ignore it fundamentally.
Which is the one that I absolutely, again, what's the hell I want to die on? What is the thing that I'm going to say, we fundamentally, if I was you, this is the thing I would fix. It's not my risk, it's yours, but this is the one I would focus on. It did make me think.
And that was a good point. That was a great point, because as soon as you start converting, this is not my risk, it's your risk. If you say security vulnerability, it means that it's a problem from security perspective. It's a problem of security that I need to solve. It's a little bit of a psychological aspect. When you say this is your application and it has this amount of risk, and it carries on this amount of quantitative direct and indirect exposure in terms of monetary impact, it's a business term against business terms, and it's much more likely to get accepted as a business problem, as it should be. And as security professional, we should be able to advise how to identify, fix, triage, and prioritize things in the fastest way.
Yeah, and it's funny, we were saying just a second ago about, well, actually, here's an asset that I don't particularly care about. So we might have an asset where we said, oh, the criticality of the asset's really low, the impact of that asset minimal. But if that asset can talk to, perhaps it is something that has a need to feed from a production database, and it needs to write back to it and update it. So actually, even though we've said, oh, this particular asset, we don't really care about it, well, what else is it talking to? And so the environment, like, okay, we've said this particular asset, really low risk, but the environment that it sits in, or the context it sits in because of what else it talks to, it needs to inherit the criticality of the most critical system that it is able to interact with.
But also those things are really, like, human are really good at identifying that pattern or that logic, talking with developer and engineer. Where we get bogged down in 90% of the time is looking at yet another spreadsheet of things prioritized without any context. And I don't hate spreadsheet,
like,
but
we need Dennis, because this is, we're back to graph databases here, right? And it's, okay, what's talking to, like, what are the connections? What are the connections? What are its relationships? Because that helps you to understand what the criticality and the likely impacts are.
Well, yes, but also the asset management. Like, in order to create a graph database of what everything is connected, is the nirvana of me and everybody else working in engineering saying, okay, I want to know everything that I have. I want to know it where it is, and I want to know it now. And I'm, as far as I know, and as far as our previous generation knows, we didn't manage to crack it at all. Even having cloud environments that are queryable through API. So I think from a graph perspective, we're getting there. We're getting on some level of knowledge and information, but I think we're still far off because of the ephemerality of some of these assets.
Well, so the the ephemeral nature of containers is a nightmare, right? Because when you say 20 years ago, I had these particular servers sitting in racks, and they were in my data center, and I had an asset tag for every one of them. And even if you say, well, it's great because within my cluster, each of my containers has its tag, it has its ID. Yeah, but it spins up, it's there for 30 seconds, whatever it's there for. You have that ephemeral nature, but how do you record your asset if your asset has gone by the time that you next look at an asset register? And the asset piece, like, if you look at the CIS, if you look at the critical security controls, like controls number 1 and 2, traditionally it's like, know all your assets, know all your software assets. And it's back to that point I said earlier, which is, oh, it's the basics. It's like level 1 in the critical security controls. It doesn't mean it's easy, because huge companies still really struggle with this. Yeah, huge companies have asset registers that aren't, like, look at how many times you have an audit and the asset register, in audit is not up to date, it's not accurate. There's devices that went AWOL ages ago and just were never updated on the asset register, or new devices that aren't on there.
Even the fixed one, even the one with the label and the sticker on it, might be disappeared. Like, we are by nature really bad at doing asset management, and with the ephemerality of some context, we lost that concept. So I think
it's hard without the ephemeral nature, and adding in ephemeral nature, it just becomes even worse. Like, what do we record? Do we say that it's a server? We may let's say we've got some really elastic system where we have to spin up loads of resources because loads of people log on at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and so our systems suddenly burst, and then they'll scale down after whatever it is. Oh, look, identity service just took a massive load. Like, okay, does that mean I've got loads more assets, but just at this particular time? It like, how do I look at them? How do I view them? What is an asset in the modern world? That's a
And
different conversation. Like,
what asset has vulnerability? Like, because all these things might have problem, but in the way you approach this, and that's where a level of automation and a level of human are best to work hand in hand, because sometimes you think about an environment and how many issues do I have an environment in a time window perspective versus watch each single individual asset, because assets don't have almost a meaning anymore. Like, they're virtualized, they're ephemeral.
Yeah. So virtualized, that's a different matter, right? In that if I spin up a virtual server, so I spin that virtual asset up, it's not really any different to a piece of tin. It's running its own well, okay, let's dodge that bit. It's running its own operating system, and it's not ephemeral in nature. It's not totally stripped down, just doing a particular piece. It is, generally speaking, each virtual server is just a better way of scaling a particular resource. So I can kind of see you're looking at the assets in that way. Kind of makes sense. But then when you look
You
at
can even
containers,
go
it's
crazy.
containers and Lambda functions where bang, it's a serverless piece of code that runs on a hook or on another piece of kind of criteria for it to run. Would we have called a cron job an asset? Like, no, it's just a
Maybe.
piece of code that ran on a particular schedule or on a particular trigger that, well, cron, but it ran on a trigger. There was a reason why it happened. It wasn't an asset while it was running.
No, but if you think even at a container, even a container is a sandwich of asset. The operating system could be an asset. The software that is installed in it could be an asset. The library that are contained in there are an asset, and they're all scripted, so they're all part of our now modern digital supply chain. And the way we tackle operating system, library, or container vulnerability overall are very, very different. And having an asset catalog or a dynamic asset catalog that capture all this goes well beyond, I guess, the spreadsheet, because try to put this in a spreadsheet.
this is now turned into a philosophical discussion about assets, but then surely isn't the asset the Terraform and the underlying container? So here's my image, that's my asset. The image, not the actual running context of it, where it has an endpoint or I've got this particular cluster, so it ceases to be the asset that I can reach. And surely the asset then is, here is my container, here is my image, this is what I'm building from, and also here is my Terraform, here is my app code base. Surely those themselves are the assets. And going back to that from earlier, your static code analysis that is run over the code as you build it, your dependency management, your dependency tracking, that is how you identify the vulnerabilities in that particular asset. And so rather than us saying, well, hang on a second, you've got 100 containers and these 100 containers are running as assets with this particular vulnerability, well, actually, here's my image, but also here's what I've got deployed, and so I can look at my code base, I can scan my image, I can see from those tests what the actual problems and the vulnerabilities within that given asset are. And I shouldn't be tracking, I've got 8,000 containers. I should be saying, what are my containers? What's my code base? What's the repo? What have I got out there? And so suddenly our repositories become more important. I mean, they've always been important. Don't get me wrong.
No, they are, and I think that's where a security professional will never see all the nuances, because some teams might build out of an image, and there are good guardrail and good pattern to actually build golden images for easy to instance, but also for container. But as well, each team might build things in a very, very different way. And that's the just nature of it. So if we keep on hammering, fix all these container vulnerability, each team might treat the problem in a different way. They might fix the image, or they might identify the problem at runtime when they build things. So I found that during my experience, having that positive collaboration where they become the gates or entitled or encouraged to fix stuff in their own pace and in their own way was particularly effective, where they decide I'll dedicate a sprint to fix vulnerability or to identify a problem, or I'll fix one container per, a story point every sprint.
One container per 6 months. Yeah,
well, that might be a bit slow.
You're right. Security teams, like I may have sounded flippant when I was talking about resourcing, but security teams struggle to scale, struggle with the expertise. Like they can't know everything that's going on within that particular dev team unless you've really been able to embed your team, or unless the team has properly got security resource. And so the best thing you can do is give people ownership and give people the ownership of, okay, we'll provide you with some of the context, all the tools to be able to identify, and the tools that will prioritize for you. So actually, rather than us coming and saying, here's a spreadsheet, I want you to fix numbers 1 through 50, that actually you log in and you're able to say, well, actually, this is the output. I've run all my tests and my output tells me these are the things that I have to care about. And so it's not dumbing it down. You still want to understand, and you still sometimes want that challenge of people saying, well, hang on a second, I disagree. Why is this one here? But to have and to add and enrich that data and then point people in the direction of the resources. I've never met anybody who wants to deliberately code something that's shoddy and full of vulnerabilities. Never met anybody in that bracket. And I was about to say, yeah, I've definitely met some people who are a bit lazy and like to cut corners, but I've never met anybody who deliberately wants to bake either bugs or vulnerabilities into systems, but I have met people who cut corners. And so if, as part of giving people the ownership, they're taking on that experience and learning of, oh, well, we found this particular thing and we had to fix it. So next time I have to code that, I'm not going to make that mistake, because otherwise I have to go back and fix it again. If you're already in that frame of mind.
No,
I don't know, maybe I've got sunlit uplands view of the future. And
no, I think that's correct. That when you treat developer like adults and you give them targets and you let them treat the problem themselves, first of all, you free up your security team to actually have that positive interaction with the team and identify maybe the fifth items that is not in your list of things to fix, that is actually really, really important to fix. But if you spend time generating risk reports or context or vulnerability or spreadsheet, first of all, it's gruesome. I don't know who would like to do that job for more than 3 months. I personally didn't.
Yeah.
So I automated the hell out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And back to my point, if we automate something, even if we don't need to do it very often, because it feels like the right thing to do.
I think it helps saving life, and it helps saving from burnout in a day and age where burnout is really high for our industry and turnover is extremely high, and especially in the vulnerability management space. It's gruesome job. It's a lot of legwork. So if we can make life of our dev and our engineers a little bit better, I mean that's the mission why I created Phoenix in the first place. It's well known.
Yeah.
But as we're coming close to the closure, I'm gonna open the floor to the question. In the meantime, Jim, do you have any final remark, final takeaway for the audience?
No, because we've had this long rambling conversation. We've gone through everything. We've gone through everything from vulnerabilities. So how do you classify an asset in the modern era? So I don't have it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm the right person to be giving closing comments, because it's such a huge topic, and it's quite emotive, because like I say, lots of people are like, get the basics right, patch your shit, like fix your systems, like know what you have. And a lot of the time it really isn't that simple. So what I would say is we need systems that enrich that data. We need to empathize with the teams that we're working with, and understand their workloads and try to prioritize and give that actionable intelligence. sometimes you'll be working with a team who are quite resistant. And so you do then need the backup to be able to say, there is a reason, and here is the data and the information that shows you that I am asking you to fix the most critical things. And I don't own the risk. Your team or your boss or your line management own that risk. And we're trying to help you to pick up the biggest, like riskiest items first.
I think that's a brilliant conclusion. That's a wonderful conclusion. That's
well, I'll take that.
That's a wonderful last remark of like prioritize your things. Fix the most smellier stuff.
I may not have articulated it very well. You have a point. Yeah.
No,
pick up the smelliest cheese first.
Exactly, but the smelly cheese, it depends on your organization, and it's not, the smelly cheese doesn't belong to security. That's the least and the most important things, and we need to articulate that as a security professional. Jokes aside, as we discuss it.
Yeah,
before.
I think now we talk about the smelly cheese. Here is the great point where actually, as
you talk about the Leicester.
As a blue
cheese.
As a metaphor, the smelliest cheese is your CVSS, right? In that just because it's the smelliest cheese, it doesn't mean it's the most dangerous cheese for you to eat. So, that's
I like that.
That's where it's your CVSS score is how smelly is the cheese, because just because it's smelly, it doesn't mean it's bad to eat. So we can't.
I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna tell Tanya to use that as well.
There are some really stinky cheeses that are absolutely delicious and not that harmful, and then there are the ones that are walking out of your fridge and don't smell anywhere near as strong.
Brilliant. I think that's a brilliant conclusion. And before we close, we have in August another one of these event where we're going to talk with Sean on very, very similar topics around modernizing digital security from pipeline to production. We're going to go a little bit more deeper dive on pipeline and production. So join us on the 28th September at 5 p.m. And this time will be 5 p.m. On this channel. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolutely pleasure. As always, we go in a philosophical rambling. But it's been a beautiful conversation.
Thank you. No. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, everyone, and stay safe out there, and go and smell the cheese and see which one, in the context where it is, in the fridge where it is probably the least smellier one. And probably I'm gonna quote myself on this.
Yeah, don't do that in the supermarket. You get funny looks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jim, and everybody stay safe out there. See ya.
Take care.